Have you ever paused and asked yourself, why is it that some people, even in silence, command respect? It's not because they know more or speak eloquently, but because they choose their words with the care of someone who knows each one reflects who they are. We live in an age where words travel farther than ever, and for that very reason, they've also become cheaper than ever. The wise, the calm, the self-disciplined, they don't just speak less. They know what not to say, and more often than not, these are the ones who have journeyed far in the path of inner mastery. In this video, we'll explore 6 things a wise person, and if you walk the Stoic path, that includes you, will never say. These are not merely things to avoid. They are 6 ways to guard your dignity, elevate your intellect, and keep your mind anchored, unshaken. 1. I know already, the death of learning. The phrase "I know already" may seem harmless, often mistaken for quick wit or confidence. Yet when uttered unconsciously, without self-restraint, it becomes one of the greatest obstacles to learning and inner growth. From a Stoic perspective, it is a clear sign of unawareness, the very condition the Stoic strives to overcome. One of the most common cognitive traps is the illusion of knowing enough. When someone says "I know already," they are subtly declaring that the subject holds no further value. This mental closure stifles curiosity and shuts the door to growth. Stoicism does not train people to be experts in all things. It teaches them to remain lifelong students. Complacency dulls our ability to listen. In conversation, when someone is interrupted with "I know already" before they have finished speaking, connection is lost. The speaker feels dismissed, undervalued. This not only kills the chance to learn, but erodes trust and respect. Stoic wisdom teaches that speech must be paired with humility, for no one knows all. It's essential to understand knowledge is not the same as application. Many can recite principles of emotional control, communication, or virtuous living, yet still lash out, stumble, or make poor choices. This reveals a truth: knowledge without embodiment is hollow. In Stoicism, knowledge only becomes wisdom when it is lived. Stoics draw a clear line between shallow knowledge and deep wisdom. Shallow knowledge is absorbed through books, social media, or casual talk, easily gained, easily forgotten. Deep wisdom is forged through discipline, reflection, and lived practice. The Stoic does not rush to declare what they know. They test it against life. Each experience becomes a lesson, each reaction a trial. Thus, they never stop learning simply because they have heard it before. Often, "I know already" is armor for the ego. It serves as a shield to hide true ignorance or fear of being corrected. When someone insists they already know, they may be avoiding the vulnerability of being taught. But Stoicism holds that there is no shame in not knowing. The real shame lies in refusing to learn. To admit you don't know is not weakness, but the strength of humble wisdom. Another consequence of "I know already" is stagnation. Believing we've learned enough, we stop exploring new perspectives. We become repetitive, resistant, and less adaptable. Dangerous in a world that demands change. The Stoic understands that every day is an opportunity to renew the self. Even old truths can reveal new light when seen through fresh eyes. Frequent use of "I know already" also paints a rigid, unapproachable persona. In teams or workplaces, such a person is often seen as difficult, resistant to feedback, and slow to grow. In contrast, one who listens with humility fosters openness, trust, and collective progress. Stoicism values observation over assertion. Instead of claiming knowledge, the practitioner asks, "Have I lived this truth?" This shift from theory to action, from external knowing to inner transformation, redefines what it means to understand. That's why Stoics don't argue to be right. They invest their energy in living rightly in daily life. Recognizing the danger of "I know already" is the first step toward a flexible and open mind. By choosing to listen, to ask, instead of a conclude, we preserve our capacity for lifelong learning. This skill is vital, not just in education or work, but in every relationship. Ultimately, Stoicism does not call us to silence or suspicion. It calls us to thoughtfulness, self-examination, and continual growth. Letting go of "I know already" is the first step toward true maturity, where knowledge is no longer a badge, but a beacon guiding our actions. 2. That's wrong. Interrupting difference. In conversations, it's not uncommon to hear a familiar reaction, "That's wrong," a phrase often used to reaffirm one's stance, reject an opposing view, or assert expertise. While it may appear harmless, even well-intentioned as a correction, upon deeper reflection, it reveals a lack of emotional control and limited capacity to listen. From a Stoic standpoint, this phrase reflects not calm reason, but an ego-driven response. "That's wrong" is often spoken reflexively when encountering a viewpoint that clashes with one's own frame of reference. This reaction stems from a desire to protect the self and control the moment. Humans are prone to assume that their perception is correct, and anything that contradicts it must be rejected. Yet Stoicism reminds us it is not the external world, but our reaction to it that we must train. A central tenet of Stoicism is to remain composed and self-governed in all circumstances. When someone immediately shuts down another's opinion with "That's wrong," they are reacting emotionally, ego speaking before reason has had a chance. For the Stoic, impulsive emotion must be restrained, as it clouds clarity. The urge to assert one's correctness often leads to conflict rather than understanding. This form of interrupting difference also disrupts the flow of communication. When we don't let others finish, when we don't allow space to absorb what is being said, we rob them of their voice and ourselves of insight. Listening is a cultivated skill. It cannot coexist with hasty judgment. Stoicism honors observation, patience, and speaking honestly when the mind is composed. In professional or educational settings, saying "that's wrong" often dampens the willingness to contribute. Repeated rejection causes people to withdraw, reluctant to share. This breeds a negative atmosphere, stifling creativity and collaboration. While Stoicism doesn't focus on team dynamics, it emphasizes the character of a leader, one who brings stability through self-command, restraint, and deep listening. Another key insight: not everything that challenges our beliefs is wrong. Humans interpret the world through layers of bias, memory, and personal conviction. These filters narrow our lens. When someone offers a different view, our first response shouldn't be rejection, but a question. Have I truly understood them? Or could their view be valid in a different context? Stoicism stresses the importance of withholding judgment. We are taught to respond only after we've examined the facts, without letting emotions interfere. In delaying judgment, the Stoic maintains composure and generosity of mind. Instead of saying "that's wrong," they might ask, "Can you explain further?" Or, "What leads you to think that?" Responses that convey respect and invite deeper dialogue. Another reason for our quick rejections lies in our discomfort with the unfamiliar. Anything that challenges what we know can stir unease, a reflexive resistance. But Stoicism teaches that this discomfort is not a threat to be silenced, but a cue to examine ourselves. Accepting difference doesn't mean agreement. It signals intellectual and emotional maturity. Beyond personal conversation, a pattern of rejection shapes collective consciousness. When a community is dominated by those who constantly say, "That's wrong," walls of ideology rise. Difference is treated as danger, not as opportunity. Stoicism encourages us to live by our values, but also to recognize that affirming our stance doesn't require denying another's. Remaining non-defensive in the face of opposition is difficult, but necessary for peace and growth. Stoicism doesn't see contradiction as conflict, but as training ground for equanimity and agile thinking. When we hear something we disagree with, our first task is to examine ourselves. Is this reason or emotion speaking? Am I reacting from ego instead of rejection? The Stoic seeks to understand why another thinks as they do. They believe every action stems from perception, and all perception is limited. With this awareness, they refrain from judgment, not out of passivity, but because they recognize truth is often more complex than it seems. Thus, they keep the conversation open, allowing insight to emerge. Importantly, direct disagreement isn't always a sign of stubbornness, but how it's delivered shapes how it's received. One may offer a counterpoint, but when done gently and with questions rather than assertions, difference becomes a path to shared growth. This holds true not only in philosophy, but in every social and professional exchange. In situations where right and wrong must be addressed, Stoicism does not forbid clarity. However, how one expresses a viewpoint is more revealing than the content itself. The ideal Stoic doesn't reject bluntly, but raises a question, reasons calmly, and seeks not victory, but truth. Finally, letting go of "that's wrong" is not about abandoning conviction. It's about mastering emotion and deepening our capacity to listen. These are pillars of Stoic discipline. One who is not ruled by emotion doesn't rush to deny, but takes time to observe, reflect, and respond wisely. In that process, inner maturity is not only formed, but strengthened. 3. Why is this happening to me? The question of a victim. In moments of hardship, failure, or loss, many instinctively ask a familiar question. Why is this happening to me? On the surface, it may seem like a natural emotional reaction to pain or shock, but when examined closely, it reflects a victim mindset, a psychological stance that strips one of agency over their own life. Through the lens of Stoic philosophy, this question signals not only a lack of self-mastery, but opens the door to a cycle of helplessness, blame, and stagnation. Stoicism, built upon the pillars of reason and self-discipline, views humans as beings capable of mastering their minds and responses. One of its central principles is the clear distinction between what is within our control and what is not. When we ask, "Why is this happening to me?" we often focus on the uncontrollable, circumstance, other people, timing, luck, instead of examining how we might respond to what unfolds. This question typically arises from a sense of injustice, hurt, or powerlessness. We expect life to follow our desires. When it doesn't, resistance to reality sets in, creating emotional friction. Asking, "Why me?" subtly implies that these misfortunes should have happened to someone else, that we deserved better, and the world erred in handing us this burden. Stoicism rejects the notion that we are victims of fate. Instead, it teaches that we are the primary navigators of our lives, not by controlling every event, but by mastering our inner response to them. Marcus Aurelius, one of Stoicism's leading voices, wrote, "If something painful happens, remember, you cannot control that, but you can always control how you meet it." When someone asks, "Why is this happening to me?" They assign themselves the role of a passive character in a story they no longer believe they can influence. This mindset leads to learned helplessness, the belief that no matter what one does, nothing will change. Such a mental framework breeds avoidance, dependency, and withdrawal from agency. Stoicism does not teach us to deny emotion, but to govern it with reason. Feeling sadness, pain, or disappointment is human when hardship strikes, but what matters is not allowing those emotions to dictate our actions or beliefs. When the question, "Why me?" arises, a Stoic does not linger there, but moves forward to ask, "What is within my control right now?" and acts from that answer. A core concept in Stoic thought is amor fati, the love of fate. This is not resignation, but a proactive acceptance of whatever life brings as a vital part of one's personal growth. When the unwanted happens, the Stoic does not ask, "Why me?" They affirm, "If it has happened, then it is mine to face, and my task is to use it to grow stronger." This question also often leads to comparison. One looks around and sees others seemingly untouched by similar hardships. From this sprouts envy, resentment, and the sense that life is unfair. Yet Stoicism teaches that no one truly knows the burdens others carry. The only experience we can validate is our own. Comparison holds no value in self-development, for each person's path is their own. This victim-oriented question also weakens the will to act. When one believes they have no influence over what happens, they begin to wait for someone to fix things, for a leader, an opportunity, or a shift in circumstances. In contrast, Stoicism champions action from within. A Stoic does not wait for ideal conditions. They transform adversity into a forge for resilience, discipline, and integrity. Another consequence of this mindset is the urge to blame. When personal responsibility is avoided, blame is cast on others, on society, on fate, and while external factors may play a role, constant accusation without personal effort only deepens the sense of powerlessness. For the Stoic, true freedom comes not from ruling the outer world, but from mastering one's inner world, something no one can take away. Shedding the victim mentality is no easy feat. It demands confronting oneself, surrendering the need for pity, and embracing personal responsibility, an act of courage and discipline. The Stoic does not ask, "Why me?" but instead, "What can I learn from this?" or "Who will I become because of this?" Abandoning the victim's question does not mean denying pain or ignoring injustice. It simply means choosing not to let those things define you. Stoicism urges composure even amidst chaos. Adversity is not to be lamented endlessly, but to be used as a furnace for building inner strength. In the end, "Why is this happening to me?" is not merely a personal lament. It's a reflection of a worldview that shapes how we live and engage with reality. Letting go of victim thinking and embracing a mindset of responsibility and autonomy is one of the foundational steps for the Stoic practitioner. Not because life becomes easier when we stop complaining, but because it is only when we stop blaming that the path to inner freedom begins. 4. I promise, when words are cheaper than action. A promise is one of the most weighty forms of communication in both personal and social life. When someone says, "I promise," they are not only making a commitment, but also staking their integrity on their words. Yet when that promise goes unfulfilled, it not only erodes the listener's trust, but also exposes a lack of integrity and discipline in the speaker. From a Stoic perspective, promises should never be made lightly. They demand responsibility and alignment between speech and action, which the Stoic regards as a supreme virtue. Stoicism doesn't emphasize crafting impressions with words. It prioritizes consistency in behavior and ethical character, proven through action. When someone frequently makes promises they don't keep, they turn language, a tool of connection, into something hollow. Each empty promise chips away at trust, and when trust fades, even the strongest bonds begin to fracture. In many social situations, promises are used to appease others in the short term. People promise to soothe, to delay, or to avoid confrontation. But Stoicism elevates truth and integrity as non-negotiable values. A promise without the will or ability to fulfill it violates the core Stoic principle of honesty. Rather than offering pleasing words, the Stoic chooses to speak less, but with certainty, and lets their actions carry the weight of commitment. Beyond how others perceive us, empty promises damage the self. When one repeatedly breaks their word, they lose faith in themselves. They begin to doubt their own capacity, to devalue their own speech, and eventually lose the will to change. For the Stoic, the link between word and deed is not just external. It's the foundation of inner stability. A critical point is that promises are often made in heightened emotional states. When excited, guilty, or under social pressure, people commit without considering their actual capacity to deliver. Stoicism teaches that decisions must come from a calm, rational mind. A promise made without clear reflection is a failure of self-control, a sign of emotional weakness, not strength. Marcus Aurelius, a key voice in Stoic thought, warned against speaking of what one is not prepared to do. In a world of constant uncertainty, the only thing we can truly govern is our thoughts, our words, our actions. When speech and action are misaligned, internal disorder sets in, bringing unease and lingering guilt. This inner contradiction, the Stoics believe, is the root of human misery. Over-promising creates a toxic cycle in relationships. A person who continually fails to keep their word exhausts others' patience, invites skepticism, and provokes frustration or apathy. This doesn't just harm their reputation. It undermines the trust that sustains human connection. Stoicism advises, better to remain silent than to speak what cannot be upheld. A timely act carries far more weight than a grand but empty promise. A common symptom of this habit is casually saying, "I will," as in, "I'll change, I'll exercise daily, I'll take better care of myself." These statements are often repeated without any real plan or follow-through. Stoicism cautions that people are easily seduced by the illusion of progress when talking about action more than taking it. Constantly speaking of what one will do can create a false sense of growth, while in reality, nothing changes. At its core, a promise is a wager on the future, but Stoicism discourages anchoring life in the future, because the future is never guaranteed. Instead, our focus belongs in the present, where action is possible, change is real, and improvement is immediate. A Stoic avoids making promises without concrete steps attached, knowing that every broken commitment widens the crack in both external trust and internal confidence. The habit of keeping promises doesn't stem from superior willpower, but from clarity of limits and priorities. The Stoic does not promise casually. They assess circumstances, measure their ability, and commit only when they are certain they can follow through. This takes humility to admit that one cannot do everything, and sometimes it is wiser to say, "I'm not sure," than to promise just to please. Furthermore, learning to say no is also a mark of integrity. Many people make promises simply to avoid disappointing others or creating discomfort, but Stoicism teaches that truth, even when hard to hear, is of greater value than hollow assurance. A person of integrity would rather say no now than say yes and fail later. This protects both personal honor and the durability of honest relationships. Stoicism also links promises to inner freedom. A person who constantly makes and breaks promises becomes a prisoner of their own words. They may feel indebted, guilty, or begin avoiding those to whom they have made commitments. All of this corrodes tranquility, the very state the Stoic seeks above all. Therefore, the path to inner freedom is not avoiding responsibility, but only committing when one can follow through and honoring that commitment to the end. Ultimately, a promise is not merely a social gesture. It is a moral declaration. It reveals the kind of person one chooses to be. In a world where words have become cheap, the one who keeps their word stands apart, reliable, principled, and grounded. For the Stoic, this is a mark of a mature mind, where speech and action are inseparable, and honor is never sacrificed for convenience. 5. I'm not wrong. The chokehold on growth. When confronted with criticism, failure, or unwanted feedback, one of the most common defense mechanisms is the phrase, "I'm not wrong." It may sound simple, but beneath it lies a complex web of beliefs and reflexes, chiefly driven by the ego. From the Stoic point of view, the refusal to admit error is not only a sign of immaturity, but one of the greatest barriers to intellectual, moral, and emotional development. Mistakes are an inescapable part of every human journey. We learn through experience, and experience includes poor judgment, missteps, and unintended consequences. The problem isn't in being wrong, but in how we respond to our wrongs. Stoicism teaches that a mature mind doesn't avoid mistakes. It accepts, examines, and goes from them. "I'm not wrong" is a textbook example of shirking personal responsibility. In denying fault, one clings to the illusion of flawlessness, of being beyond error. This is an emotional reaction, not a rational one. Stoicism elevates reason above all else, holding that human worth is not measured by constant correctness, but by the ability to self-reflect and improve. One of Stoicism's pillars is honesty with oneself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong, I'll gladly change, because I seek truth, not ego preservation." To deny error is to deny truth, in Stoic thought, is the only compass worthy of following. When someone says, "I'm not wrong," in the face of clear evidence, they deceive not just others, but themselves. Self-deception is a dangerous form of psychological resistance. It traps a person in a cycle of faulty behavior, repeated consequences, and deeper denial. Each loop weakens the capacity for objective reflection until they can no longer distinguish between reality and self-protective instinct. To the Stoic, failure to examine oneself is a root cause of long-term suffering. Refusing to acknowledge mistakes also damages relationships. When someone refuses to admit fault, they make others feel blamed, dismissed, or disrespected. The absence of fairness undermines trust and mutual regard. Stoicism reminds us that personal ethics cannot be separated from social responsibility. A mature person owns their mistakes, not to seek pardon, but to restore justice and clarity in their connections. The reaction, "I'm not wrong," is often tied to the fear of being diminished. Many equate their self-worth with being infallible. To err, then, feels like a threat to their value, so they hide or reject it. But Stoicism teaches that true worth lies not in evading error, but in how one responds to it. Epictetus taught that our power lies in our response, and how we deal with error is one of the clearest tests of that power. One may be intelligent, talented, and knowledgeable, but without the capacity to admit mistakes, their growth will plateau. Maturity is not marked by never failing, but by getting closer to truth with every stumble. This is a continuous process, one requiring humility and courage, both of which are foundational in Stoicism. Views the admission of error as an ethical exercise, one that purifies the ego and strengthens self-control. To recognize one's fault and speak it aloud is to practice integrity. Integrity doesn't mean being flawless. It means standing with truth, even when it bruises pride. This is the way of one ruled by reason, not emotion. Failing to acknowledge error carries long-term psychological consequences. Those who constantly resist truth to protect their ego become tense, anxious, and chronically defensive. It drains mental energy, leaving them exhausted and directionless. By contrast, those who admit fault experience relief. They are free from the burden of pretense and can instead focus on correction and progress. Stoicism also draws a clear line between admitting error and self-punishment. Practitioners of this philosophy do not berate themselves. They treat mistakes as learning tools. They don't wallow in guilt or self-blame. They act from understanding. This is the key difference. We admit fault not to suffer, but to liberate ourselves from faulty behavior and move toward the good. The ability to admit mistakes is also a sign of psychological strength. Those with a stable foundation don't fear being wrong because they don't tie their worth to perfection, but to continual growth. The more one matures, the more they recognize that errors are the raw material of evolution. Stoicism doesn't demand flawlessness, but sees mistakes as a natural part of moral and intellectual training. Letting go of the phrase "I'm not wrong" is more than a change in speech. It's a shift in mindset. It requires a willingness to face oneself, to relinquish control over how others perceive us, and to focus on what is true, even when it's hard to accept. This is a practice, not a one-day transformation. But each time we admit a mistake, we move closer to the inner freedom Stoicism calls us to. 6. I'm going to soon. The illusion dressed as ambition. In everyday conversations, many people have a habit of speaking about future plans with phrases like, "I'm going to start a business," "I'm going to write a book," "I'm going to change my lifestyle," or "I'll start exercising every day, starting next week." These statements are far from uncommon and are often spoken with a sense of positive expectation for what lies ahead. Yet from a Stoic perspective, the habit of frequently talking about what one will do carries hidden risks. It can weaken the will to act, trapping one in illusion and internal stagnation. Stoicism is a philosophy of action, where deeds always outrank words. The Stoic is not encouraged to perform through speech, but to express conviction through consistent behavior. When someone constantly talks about what they'll do but never follows through, they not only lose credibility with others, they deceive themselves, mistaking speech for progress when, in truth, all remains theoretical or imagined. One reason people fall into the habit of announcing future plans is the instant gratification it offers. Psychological research has shown that talking about a goal can trigger the brain to release dopamine, a neurotransmitter linked to pleasure. In sharing plans, a person feels a simulated sense of accomplishment, even though nothing has yet been done. Stoicism sees this as a form of illusion, where speech replaces action and creates a counterfeit feeling of success. Saying "I'm going to" may mark the beginning of a worthy pursuit, but when it becomes habitual without action, it reflects a lack of discipline and commitment. Stoicism esteems self-control and personal accountability. The ideal figure speaks little and does much. To casually disclose one's plans often reveals a need to impress more than a readiness to grow. Moreover, announcing intentions prematurely can create unnecessary pressure. Once a goal is spoken, The person may feel watched or judged if they don't succeed. Social pressure shifts their motivation from intrinsic values to fear of appearing inadequate. Stoicism teaches that action should be rooted in internal values and personal purpose, not in the desire for approval. When action is driven by the urge to please others, inner freedom begins to erode. Another cost of overtalking future plans is the dispersion of energy. People who spend too much effort explaining what they'll do tend to delay actual execution. This sets off a cycle of stagnation. Speak to feel better. Delay action. Feel disappointed. Speak again to regain momentum. Stoicism identifies delay as a key enemy of progress. Progress in this philosophy comes not from declarations, but from steady, immediate acts in the present. The Stoic keeps plans private as a way to preserve focus and conserve mental energy. Keeping goals unspoken isn't about fear of failure. It's about protecting motivation from premature exposure. Every time a goal is verbalized, some of the drive is lost to pressure, and the rest dissipates through the pleasure of having spoken it. Holding goals in silence until they manifest through action is a Stoic's way of staying clear-headed on the path of growth. It's also worth noting that excessive talk about the future disconnects us from the present, the only place where real action can occur. When someone repeats, "I'm going to," they begin to live in a time that hasn't yet come, weakening their grip on the now, where decisions, behaviors, and change actually take place. Stoicism teaches that presence is the key to peace and freedom. The future is beyond our grasp. The present is where autonomy resides. Furthermore, making numerous unfulfilled promises undermines self-confidence. When words go unmatched by deeds, others lose trust, and the speaker begins to doubt their own will and capability. Over time, this fosters insecurity, frustration, and helplessness. Stoicism emphasizes consistency between what one thinks, says, and does. This alignment is the foundation of psychological stability and personal dignity. From a social standpoint, too much promise and too little follow-through erodes trust in relationships. When someone repeatedly says, "I will," but fails to deliver, others begin to lower expectations and raise suspicion. This affects cooperation, credibility, and one's reputation. In families and workplaces alike, broken commitments can sow conflict, misunderstandings, and emotional strain. Another key insight: future planning is often used as a form of escapism. When people are dissatisfied with the present, they may dream of the future as a way to soothe anxiety. But dreaming without action leads only to delay and deeper disappointment. Stoicism encourages confronting reality with reason, not masking it with unfounded visions. Real change comes not from words about the future, but from decisions made in the present. Stoicism doesn't reject planning, but insists that caution and concrete steps must outweigh grand declarations. A Stoic doesn't deny the value of long-term vision, but understands that plans are just maps, and action is the journey. No matter how refined a map may be without movement, it remains just paper. Therefore, sharing a plan should come with tangible steps, or be held in silence until reality gives it form. Ultimately, Stoicism views quiet before action as a mark of wisdom and depth. Those who speak little about plans but act persistently are the ones who create lasting change. They need no proof. The results speak for themselves. In a world where words flow freely and cheaply, the decision to stay silent and act instead becomes a rare form of self-discipline. This is the path toward the inner strength and quiet dignity that Stoic philosophy continually upholds. When I first encountered Stoic philosophy, I thought it was too abstract. too distant from the chaos of modern life. But the more I read, the more I reflected, the clearer it became. The true power of Stoicism lies not in theory, but in application. I began noticing the moments when I was about to say, "I know already," "I'm not wrong," or "I'll get to it soon." These phrases used to come out instinctively, like a reflex. But now I see they weren't signs of confidence, but defenses of the ego. And the incredible thing is, just being aware of that moment gives me the chance to choose, to listen instead of interrupt, to stay silent instead of making empty promises, to act instead of talking about action. I also learned to stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and instead ask, "What will I do with this now?" That simple mental shift helped me get through many difficult moments where emotion could have easily taken control. Stoicism doesn't turn us into emotionless beings. On the contrary, it gives us the ability to master our emotions, so we're not pulled around by circumstance, but can respond with clarity and calm. I don't always get it right, but I practice every day. And I believe that if you start with the smallest things, even those 6 phrases to avoid, you'll begin to feel a real transformation from within. If you found this content valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next, where we continue training our inner resilience in a world that never stops shifting. Remember, strength doesn't mean never saying the wrong thing. It means choosing to say the right thing at the right moment and letting your actions speak louder than your promises. See you in the next video.